Hello everyone and welcome back into yet another edition of the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. My name, as always, is Christopher Shepard. Thank you all for tuning into today's show on this lovely Thursday afternoon. We have a great one ahead. We are going to continue with our bubble watch throughout the different conferences in college basketball, beginning today's show with the Big 12, then going on into the ACC and concluding our bubble watch talk for the day with the Big 10. Then we get into the top 2025 NBA draft risers. Which three players do I consider as players to look out for in the next couple of months to see their draft stock either rise or plummet? And then we transition over to the world of baseball. We look at the top 5 MLB prospects heading into the 2025 season. But before we get into any of that fun stuff, I do want to remind you, as always, that if you haven't done so already, to like, follow, and subscribe to the show in the network if you want to keep up to date with all the content around not just my show, but the network as well and the other shows around it as well. But if you do want to contribute and interact with the show a little bit more directly, consider availing yourselves of the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube, as well as our website, gsmcpodcast.net, to better leave any opinions, any feedback, any input you may have throughout the show, because it just makes it that much better when you, our faithful audience, is contributing to it and is genuinely appreciated, as well as any tips or donations you might consider leaving if you feel so inclined as well. But without further ado, let's just jump right into today's show, starting off talking bubble watch. We got three very different conferences to discuss here in terms of the teams on the outside looking in currently, those with work to do, and those that are even locks potentially. And it all starts with the Big 12. Perhaps the deepest, most balanced conference right now in college basketball, but I don't necessarily know if it's the best or most talented. But I do think that several teams, nevertheless, have a chance to go on deep runs. So, without further ado, let's just jump right into the Big 12 Conference. Talk about some of the locks here, talk about some of the problems they may face, talk about some of the positives that they've come across throughout their runs, and then let's get into the guys looking to stay in the race for the tournament. So, without further ado, let's just jump right into it. Starting off with the locks here now. Like I said, the Big 12 is a deep conference. It's battle-tested. These are teams waiting to break out in the NCAA tournament in a couple of weeks. And these are all teams highly capable of getting to at least the Elite Eight, not let alone the Final Four here. But I do think that each and every single one of the teams who are locks has some kind of issue to it, whether it be strength in one area and lacking in depth in another, or over-reliance on one specific individual player. I just think that the logjam of talent at the top of the conference needs to separate itself from other conferences' best teams come postseason time. And I'm not necessarily certain if they can do that. So let's talk about each and every single one of the locks already. Let's talk about the ones that are most concrete and I believe to have the best chance of making it to the Final Four. The Houston Cougars, very deep team, perhaps one of the best defensive teams in the country, if not the number one defensive team in the country. Built very well in terms of their front court depth with two guys up front in J1 Roberts and Javier Francis with experience. But the fact of the matter is, last year they had a much better point guard in Jamal Shead to lead them, and now they're relying on Oklahoma transfer Milos Ujan. And last year, Jamal Shead couldn't even get them to the Elite Eight. They crashed out in the Sweet 16. So can Milos Ujan help them in terms of giving them a little bit of a scoring pop in close games, because they have the defense to make it all the way, but they might need to outscore some of these opponents in other conferences to have a chance. And I don't necessarily know if Milos Ujan is the guy at the point guard position to do that. Then Iowa State has the most balanced team in the Big 12, both in terms of offense and defense. That wasn't the case last year, where they clearly relied on their defense to get them as far as they did. This year, they're a little bit more balanced. They're very potent, especially in terms of their fast break and transition abilities and getting out fast. I love Curtis Jones' leadership, perhaps the vocal leader of this team, and they have a guy in Joshua Jefferson who can get it done down low. But I do feel that, say if they face a Duke, an Auburn, and Alabama down the line, can they win in a shootout fashion? Can they match these high-powered offenses in the nitty-gritty moments of the NCAA tournament to advance even further? And I'm not sure. Then let's talk about the preseason number one in the AP poll, Kansas Wildcats. Definitely a little bit more disappointing than people would have expected them to be, but they still are a very deep team. Great inside-outside duo in DeWant Harris and Hunter Dickinson, who potentially could have a fascinating tournament if he gets going. But I just don't think they've been consistent and efficient enough to guarantee that they can make a deep run in this year's tournament. And then both Arizona and Texas Tech, again, very experienced teams, but I think they might be a little bit too reliant on certain players in crunch time. For Arizona, it's Caleb Love. For Texas Tech, they are a little bit more balanced, but I don't necessarily know if a team led by a guy like Jacob Toppin can advance if he's the only one producing. I know they have Darian Williams as well, but it's too much pressure on those two players. And then for Arizona, Caleb Love, for them to carry these teams any further in the tournament than, say, the Sweet 16. So I can see some top teams in this conference make it far, potentially even to the Final Four. But I don't know if they have the talent, the depth, the offense, most importantly, because this is a highly defensive league, to break through and claim themselves the national champion. I just don't see it. But now let's get into the teams who should be in. And one of these teams could also be amongst the locks at this moment in time. They did just lose to Houston, though. And again, very similar to some of the teams who already have cemented themselves as firm locks, is the Baylor Bears. This Baylor Bears team has a tough strength of schedule, and they've done well against it. They have the 15th toughest strength of schedule nationally. They have a number 14 ranking in BPI, so all the rating systems like them as well. But I do feel they haven't shown up against elite opponents, especially against top 50 opponents where they're only 4-8. And this loss to Houston calls into question their abilities to compete against the elite opponents, not just in the Big 12, but around the NCAA this season. And I do think that in terms of the spectrum of teams who are either talented in one area and lacking in another, or over-reliance on important players, I think they fall in the latter camp. They rely on two freshmen, nevertheless, in VJ Edgecombe and Robert Wright III, and they brought in transfer to try and supplement them in Norchad Omeyer down low and Jeremy Roach as a supplementary guard. But I just don't know if they can put it all together like potentially some of the other teams in this loaded conference. So Baylor, while they're starting to become a little bit more lock territory, I do feel that they might be the weakest link on the locks in the Big 12. Then those with work to do are very interesting teams. Let's start off with BYU. They have lost 2 straight against fellow bubble candidates Arizona and Cincinnati. They did score a win over West Virginia, who we're going to talk about a little bit as well. I do think that they're starting to get in the conversation of at least having a fighter's chance of getting a top 10 seed in the NCAA tournament. They do rank 8th in net, and that spells like success in terms of getting into the tournament for a team that's expected to put in at least 7 to 8 teams, and they're a borderline top 30 BPI team, and they don't necessarily have as much depth as some of the top teams in the Big 12. They do have an exciting point guard from Europe, and Igor Domin, one of the best passers in college basketball this year. But ultimately, their goal is to navigate a tough schedule towards the end of the month. Kansas and Arizona coming up before in March. West Virginia again. and Iowa State are on the docket for them. So if they can navigate that tough schedule, chances are they'll start to become a bit more lock territory. And then West Virginia are a team that have dropped 7 of their past 10, trending downwards, and they rank 6th in the Big 12 in net. But I do feel like they can play themselves into the conversation. They're one of those teams that's sneakily more balanced than they look, and I think they're going to be more than the sum of their parts should they get into the tournament. Look out for this team down the stretch. They have a big game Saturday against Baylor, and another one coming up at the end of the month against Texas Tech. So if they can win and continue to win, get back into rhythm here, and really make a go of it, they could start trending into the should be in conversation. And then the one team that I'm not necessarily certain about, Cincinnati, they have a couple fascinating players. They're trending downwards in terms of trajectory. They're currently at 27% to make the tournament, and they have big, big games. And they can add a lot of wins above the bubble to their schedule, and they currently rank 36th in BPI, and they have a chance to skyrocket over those rankings if they win several of these games. They're at Iowa State Saturday, at West Virginia on the 19th. They're at home against Baylor February 25th, and they're at Houston March 1st. So if they can split or go above 500 in each of those games, they have a fighter's chance. But really, I'm looking at the top teams in the Big 12 to really try and make a go of it in the NCAA tournament. And I do think that Houston and Iowa State are the cream of the crop if you're looking for top contenders there. But we'll just about do it for the first segment here, because coming next, we are going to be looking at the ACC. Definitely a much weaker conference in the Big 12, but still a lot of top dogs to talk about within it. So we'll be right back after this short break. Don't go anywhere.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?